All right, everyone, welcome. I call to order this meeting of the Finance Committee for Thursday, November 21st, 2024. And in the spirit of truth and reconciliation, I acknowledge that we are gathered in the heart of the Treaty 7 territory of Southern Alberta. This land is home to the Blackfoot Confederacy, consisting of the Siksika, Kainai, and Piikani First Nations, also the Tsuut'ina First Nation, and our most adjacent Indigenous neighbors, the Stoney Nakoda First Nations, comprised of Bearspaw, Goodstoney, and Chiniki. Further, we are located within the Rocky View Métis District within the Battle River Territory District 4. The town of Canmore is committed to working to live in right relations and to advance truth and reconciliation as we acknowledge the many Indigenous peoples whose footsteps have marked these lands for generations. I'm grateful for the traditional knowledge keepers and elders who are still with us today and those who have gone before us. Looking to now approve the agenda. Are there any changes? Seeing none. I move approval of the agenda for November 21st, 2024 Finance Committee meeting as circulated. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. We'll now go to the minutes. C1, are there any errors or omissions to the minutes of the April 23rd, 2024 Finance meeting? Seeing none, I will move approval of the minutes of the April 23rd, 2024 Finance meeting as circulated. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. And we'll move to item D1, Auditor Appointment for 2024.
Do you see there's a note from Calvin? He just said maybe it's on purpose, but we can't hear anything.
Okay. Oh.
So I'm wondering about that unmute on the underneath the presentation.
Oh, yeah. Hang on. There.
Maybe ask if they can hear now.
Can you hear now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, excellent.
Sorry about that.
All right, so are we okay to proceed, given that the would all of the first part have been captured by the streaming?
By the stream, yes, sure.
Okay.
I just put the Zoom.
It just for the Zoom? Okay, very good. All right, so we are welcome to our visitors, Kelvin and Michelle, and we have just turned to item D1 in our agenda, Auditor Appointment, and so I'll turn to Ms. Gibbons.
Yes, and now our friends at Avail can hear all the nice things I'm about to say about them. So Avail CPA have provided audit services to the town for the last 13 years. Our current contract with them expired at the end of the last fiscal year, so December 31st, 2023. So we're now requesting an extension for 1 year for the fiscal year that will end at the end of next month. We've reviewed the contract extension we received from them with consideration to their emphasis on customer service, their proposed approach to our audit, as well as the competitive fixed pricing we receive. And I did just want to flag here that we do intend to complete a request for proposal process for next year to really make sure we understand the market offerings and that we continue to receive the best value with regards to our audit services. So at this point, we're looking for a 1 year extension, again, for this fiscal year. So with that, I'm behind in my slides. With that, the recommendation is that the Finance Committee appoint Avail CPA as the external financial auditor for the town of Canmore for the fiscal year ending December 31st, 2024. It's really short and sweet, and then I'll hand it over to them, assuming they're appointed, to actually do our pre-audit report today.
Okay, well, I'll, first of all, before making a motion, ask if anyone has any questions.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Thank you. So we've had Avail for a long time, and they've done a fantastic job, in my opinion. Is there any concern about familiarity with the file over a period of time? Like, does it, I think we've had different people at Avail on the file, which gives me comfort.
So, yeah, like you say, we have had different supervisors over our file, so we do periodically have kind of new eyes on everything. I do feel like we really benefit from their familiarity with the town, with our process, and everything there. It is a reason that we do go to RFP periodically, just so we understand what's happening out there, and if there is a better offering, we would obviously consider it. But maybe I'll even let Calvin and Michelle handle that from a risk perspective, and if there are things that they do proactively on their side to kind of counteract that. But again, I think the benefits of their familiarity with us outweigh any concerns I would have about that familiarity leading to, for lack of a better word, maybe complacency.
Thank you very much, Ms. Gibbons.
And I do note that an RFP is intended for next year to just see what's out in the market and explore that. Okay, go ahead, Councillor Faubert.
I was just wondering, I know there are a number of other organizations that use Avail because we use Avail. When we go out to RFP, is that something that's considered?
So currently, all of our affiliates, especially the ones that are consolidated with us, do receive separate proposals from Avail, so I have shared those with our partners. They're not obligated to go with the same firm that we do. They could choose to go their own way if their boards saw the benefit of that. But there are significant efficiencies to having the same firm do our audit as well as the audits of all of our, especially the subsidiaries that will ultimately be consolidated into our statements. So they are all separate, and that is considered as part of the RFP process, that they could choose to go their own way, but because of the efficiencies we have historically found it beneficial to all be within, under the same umbrella, if you will.
Great. Any other questions? All right, I will move that the Finance Committee appoint Avail CPA. Well, actually, just before I make that motion, welcome Councillor Ma. You're earlier than anticipated, and so thank you for all your efforts to get back here to the meeting on time. So we're just at item D1, and we're appointing our auditor for 2024. And so the recommendation is what I'll be moving, that the Finance Committee appoint Avail CPA as the external financial auditor for the town of Canmore for the fiscal year ending December 31st, 2024. Is there any discussion on that motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. And now with the pre-audit report, item D2, do I go to Avail for that? Sure, I can hand it over. Okay, great. Well, then I will, I believe, is it Kelvin and Michelle on the line?
Yes.
Very good. Michelle, the microphone is yours.
Excellent. Well, thanks so much for having Calvin and I here today to present on the 2024 audit plan. I'm just going to request if I could share my screen because I have everything summarized in a nice PowerPoint presentation for you all.
Certainly. That's in process.
Okay. Can you all see the presentation? It should say
Yes.
2024 audit plan.
Yes.
Okay, awesome. Then I'll begin. So yeah, our presentation essentially summarizes the pre-audit letter that you have in your package this morning. So to start off, we are engaged to audit the consolidated financial statements for the town for the year ended December 31st, 2024. We will then prepare the income tax return and related schedules, and we are also looking after the review engagement for the family and community support services. Under the purpose and scope of our examination, in the letter, it will note that management is responsible for the financial statements. We always like to emphasize that these are management's financial statements, and we're just here to provide an audit opinion on them. Then it will note council is responsible for management oversight, and then our responsibilities as auditors is to identify and assess the risk of material misstatements. We are to understand the town's internal controls. We evaluate the accounting policies and estimates used in the financial statements. We conclude on the going concern assumption, which is just the ability of the town to continue to operate for the foreseeable future and never any concerns there. And then we evaluate the overall presentation of the financial statements in accordance with the accounting standards for public sector entities. So this is where at the conclusion of our audit, we will provide an audit opinion on whether the financial statements present fairly in accordance with such standards. Then for our audit approach, we use, oops, I'm clicking too many times here, sorry. For our audit approach, we use what is called a risk-based approach. So this is where we focus the majority of our audit work on areas that just have a higher risk of being materially misstated. So for the town, these areas will be the tangible capital assets, the deferred revenue, the asset retirement obligation, and net assets. The reason why these areas are higher risk is just due to the accounting being more complex by nature. But we are always provided sufficient detail and support from the town's accounting department when we're auditing these areas. And then for materiality, often you'll hear us use this term in our presentations and throughout the audit, but what does it really mean? So essentially, it's a term used to describe the significance of a financial statement item to a decision maker. An item will be considered material if it's probable that its omission or misstatement would influence or change a decision. So if you had, say, a $5 misstatement or omission in your financial data, that wouldn't have much of an impact on a decision. However, if there was $1 million misstatement, that would have a significant influence on an individual's decision at the end of the day. So materiality, our threshold for the 2024 audit is going to be $2.2 million. And from here, we take percentages and fractions of this amount to guide us in our audit work. So we are reviewing a number of transactions and balances at a fraction of that materiality threshold. And then we also complete random sampling regardless of the dollar value, just to ensure we have a balanced approach. And then that will lead me into our three main types of audit procedures. So the first one here is going to be test of controls. With this test, we test the key financial controls of the town just to ensure that they're operating effectively. When controls are operating the way that they are intended to, they do reduce the risk of errors from occurring just because it already has that built-in system of the checks and balances within the process. And then test of details is where we're taking source documents and agreeing it into balances and transactions during the year. And then the last one here, substantive analytical procedures. So these procedures allow us to conclude if the recorded amounts are reasonable and within expectations. So the accounting team often gets a number of questions from us, asking why balances have increased and decreased from the prior year. Why are they higher or lower than budget expectation, both on the operating and the capital side as well? Any questions so far in the presentation? I know we're kind of covering some heavy technical audit area at this point in time.
I might just ask a question since you asked, and that's picking up on Councillor Graham's question. Would these audit procedures overcome any concerns about familiarity, or maybe you could just comment on familiarity and how that affects the audit process?
Yeah, so being familiar does provide a positive advantage, just because when we're looking at expectations, especially with this last point here, where we, because of our knowledge of the town, if something is out of our own knowledge and asking those questions, does that make sense? Is that what we typically expense? Or these are the trends that we have seen in the past? If not, why? So it does give us an advantage on that end, just because we already have those built-in expectation and that knowledge of the town. So I do think it's more as an advantage versus a disadvantage. And each year when we're developing our audit plan and looking at the numbers, there will always be changes that happen every year. But we develop our audit plan and we assess the risk on those balances just to make sure that we're covering off those areas to ensure there's no material misstatements. Anything else to add, Calvin, on that, or?
We'd also provide a second partner review on the file. So as someone else is looking at it other than me, whether that's Michelle as our newest partner or one of our other partners who will be looking at it. So we do have two partners reviewing the file just to ensure that the familiarity is not causing issues, and that there is someone that isn't necessarily familiar with your file giving it a second review.
Great, thank you.
Great. Any additional questions?
I don't see any.
Okay, excellent. So our next slide will give you a nice bird's eye view of the audit process from beginning to end. So to start off the audit process is our pre-audit meeting, which is Calvin and I here today presenting to you. After today's meeting, we will move into our preliminary work where we'll start having discussions with the accounting team on some of the items that have happened over the last year, and then we'll begin some of our preliminary audit testing at that point in time. Then after that, we'll move into our audit plan. So once the accounting department's team is happy with the numbers on the town side, they will provide us their finalized trial balance, and then we'll use that to develop our audit plan. Once the audit plan is approved, that is where we begin executing on that plan, and where the majority of our work happens is in the audit field work. At the conclusion of the audit field work, we'll be able to form our audit opinion, and then that is where we present our audit opinion and the audit results to council, typically at the end of April. And then after the approval of the audited financial statements, we'll get everything signed, filed off with municipal affairs and CRA at that point in time, and then it concludes us for one more year regarding the audit. And then just to attach some high-level dates to that, typically our field work begins in early March because we have to audit on an non-consolidated basis for each of the entities. So the town of Canmore and then the other entities that the town controls. And then we'll move into the consolidation process on that end. And then we'll present, as I mentioned, the audit results to council at the end of April. And then the hard deadline is to get everything off to municipal affairs by May 1st, but never any concerns with the timing and meeting those deadlines. Any questions with the audit process or timing?
No, it looks like everything's fine.
Good. Okay, great. And then for our final slide, the pre-audit letter will conclude with that our audit procedures are primarily designed to determine if it's reasonable that the financial statements are free from material misstatements in accordance with the accounting standards. They're not specifically designed to detect illegal acts, intentional misstatements, or fraud. We're not conducting a fraud audit or a forensic audit. We're conducting a financial statement audit. However, in the rare instance, if we do come across anything of concern, we'll bring it up to council management and go through the proper avenues at that point in time. And then the letter will also note that there's no major issues discussed with management prior to the appointment as auditors. We will be requesting written representation from management at the conclusion of the audit, which is a standard process that we do. So essentially management will sign off on a letter noting that they have fulfilled their responsibility in regards to the financial statements, provided us all of the audit working papers, answered our questions to the best of their knowledge. So that's just a standard letter that's is always signed at the conclusion of the audit. And then our last item here is our auditor's independence. So Avail and all of our team members are independent of the town and all of your representatives. Each year, Avail will send out a list of all of our insurance clients to our team members for everyone to review to ensure that there's no threats of independence, as that's a key item to have for your auditor when performing the audit. So no issues or concerns were raised during that review on our side. Any questions? That's essentially the conclusion of our presentation.
Okay, thank you. I don't see any questions. My one question is around closed session. Is that something that is standard we are to go into and have that closed session? Or is that just in case that it's needed?
No, we would, if it's okay, we would ask to proceed into that closed session just because we do have a question to ask of you all.
Very good. Okay, so before I move that we go into a closed session, are there any questions? I do not see any. So I will move that council or the Finance Committee close the meeting to the public to prevent disclosure of personnel evaluations in accordance with Section 17, Sub 4, Sub F of the Freedom of Information Protection and Privacy Act. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. All right, so we'll just Okay, we are back. We're back streaming, and we're out of closed session. And our next item is D3, Plan for the 2025 Budget Approval and Timing.
So we wanted to start these finance committee meetings by addressing their revised timing and what the plan is with regards to having approvals in place. Sorry.
Just your presentation.
Guaranteed I'll keep forgetting either the mic or the presentation. So, yeah, no content yet. Okay, so yeah, just making sure we have these approvals in place by January 1st in order to meet our MGA budget requirements. So as a reminder about those, what those requirements are, so as a reminder, under Section 242, we do have to have an adopted operating budget in place by January 1st of each year. Now, council may adopt an interim budget, and then basically once we have the ultimate operating budget for that year adopted, the interim budget ceases to have any impact. And again, on the capital side, similarly, we need to have a budget in place by January 1st. So typically, we have our finance committee meetings and deliberations all concluded, and then council would have the operating and capital budgets approved prior to the holidays so that they're in place prior to January 1st. This year, due to uncontrollable circumstances that affected the capacity of some key internal positions that are related to the budget, the timing of the typical finance committee meetings is happening later than usual. The good news is we do have an adopted plan in place. So the operating plan for 2025 was adopted with the 2023 budget process and then amended with the amendments for 2024. And similarly, the capital has been adopted as well. So here I have just quickly what they actually looked like the first time you saw them. I do have them actually as attachments to the digital package today. They were attachments 1 and 2. And again, this is how they would have been presented at the time of the 2024 amendments. So as a reminder, some of the key pieces in the 2025 plan I wanted to highlight were the new positions. So the HR recruitment assistant has actually already been hired due to the high recruitment volumes we're experiencing right now. We have a protective services administration assistant moving from part-time to full-time, and then the financial analysts and communications advisors positions. I also didn't flag here, but the continued phase-in of the increased fire staffing was also part of the 2025 plan as previously approved. So beyond what we had approved back then, new works happened. So the one area of exception that we identified was the livability tax program, since this work is new since the time of those amendments this time last year. So this work has been expedited specifically to be in place for the 2025 tax year. So to allow for that critical work to continue uninterrupted, this budget we're envisioning would be added to the 2025 plan. And the budget actually for the livability tax program will be presented at the next finance committee meeting to facilitate that earlier approval as part of the interim budget. The one other piece we wanted to flag is that we are intending to have the utility rate bylaws and the master fee schedule approved at the December meeting as well. We have a special meeting, I believe, on December 10th to ensure those rates can be in effect for the entire calendar year, both from a customer service, ease of community understanding, and also for ease of administrative purposes. So in conclusion, on December 10th, we're intending to take the previously adopted 2025 plan that will form the base of our interim budget and then add on the budget for the livability tax program, and stay tuned for that to come forward at the next meeting. And then we'll get the utility rate bylaw and master fee schedule approved at the same time, so those intended rates will be in place by January 1st. So next, I was just going to quickly walk through the finance committee schedule and where we go from here. So today, we're at the finance committee. So finance committee are the blue ones, and then green are actually council meetings. So today's all pretty high level. We'll do a bit of stage setting for 2025, key external impacts that are affecting the budget we're bringing to you, a walkthrough of the provincial downloading schedule as we've done in prior years, and then walk through a review of the strategic plan, key policies that impact the budget, as well as a brief economic update. Then next Tuesday, we'll move into actually the town budget, talk at a high level about what the finance committee can anticipate there, talk about some of the key pieces that we had discussions around, like the pressures of growth. There's a new approach we're taking with regards to a corporate administrative transfer, so there's new concepts we'll be walking through there. And then to support those early approvals in December, we'll also kind of flip the standard order we would do and actually look at the utilities, both solid waste services and water first, so that the groundwork is in place for those early rate bylaw approvals, and then also walk through the livability program budget, since that will form the add-on to the 2025 previously adopted plan for the interim purposes. Then December 5th, the following week, we'll actually get into the detail of the operating budget, and that will include discussion of the requests we've received from our affiliates, and we'll go through the options list, again, as in previous years, for Finance Committee's consideration, increases and decreases we've identified, followed by the capital discussion on December 10th. So we'll really have presented a lot of the meat of the budget we're bringing to you prior to the holidays. So then after we walk through capital as the Finance Committee, then I believe is the order of the day, we'll actually go into the council presentation on December 10th to do the logistics of canceling any 2024 capital projects. That's where we'll approve the interim budget, including the livability program budget, and we'll do those utility rate bylaws and the master fee schedule. Then we pick up again in January for 2 meetings for discussion and deliberation, intending to bring the budget amendments policy for update and approval by the Finance Committee. And then ultimately on February 4th, we're looking to have the final operating and capital budget approval. So I know it's kind of small on the slide, but I wanted to kind of show the whole map of where we're going all at a glance. Any questions on any of that content?
If anyone has a question, just hit your button and jump on in. No, it looks like we don't. So does that move us then to item D4, high-level stage setting? Okay. What is going on? you'll need your mic on, please.
Before we started to get into the nuts and bolts and all the details of the budget, we thought it was important that we spent a little bit of time to talk about high-level stage setting. And we've been doing this internally with managers and supervisors as they've been preparing budgets, so we thought it would be good to do with you too. Because really the theme of, how do I do this? Just like this? I don't understand now. Where does my cursor go? Back to here?
We see it.
Oh, I know, it's on the screen, but how do I advance it on the
have to go
screen?
You can hit the down arrow, or you can,
Oh, the down.
there you go.
Okay, thank you. Phew. Okay, so we want to thank you for the support. Want to talk about change because we are certainly living in a time of change, and our community in particular is going through a lot of change, so is the organization. There's multiple changes happening at the same time, and some of the change is happening very quickly. So really this budget is a lot of conversation around how we're going to manage in the context of all the various changes that are happening, some of which we can control, some of which we can't. And we are operating within a changing landscape, as we all know. There's urgency and a need for change, and the world around us is changing, and we have to respond to that. And old models of how we used to respond no longer serve, so there are some things we're really having to look at doing in different ways and in ways that we've never done before. And so some of the budget conversation to come in the later meetings will be around changing some of the ways that we've done things. And before we get into that, one of the conversations we had internally as we were working on this budget was around multi-solving. And there's a multi-solving institute who sends out great resources about multi-solving. And multi-solving is simply the idea of working together across sectors to address multiple problems with one policy or investment or project. So when you can find something that solves multiple problems at once, it's usually a much more robust and meaningful change or solution than trying to individually solve discrete problems. It also can sometimes make things feel more complex, but it certainly has required good, solid working relationships and for us to be working together and collaborating across departments and divisions in new and different ways. And so we really wanted to try to acknowledge that. When you're working in multi-solving, there are 4 tasks that need attention. One of the priorities is to prevent existential problems like climate change from worsening. Another thing that needs attention is to help people and nature adapt to the impact of problems that we're too late to fully prevent from happening. To undo and repair injustices like structural racism as one example, and to do all of those things with an attitude of care and mutuality. So we don't want to pit things against one another, pit problems against one another, or get into some kind of competition or face-off about what's the worst problem. There's a lot of complex problems, and we need to handle them in ways that acknowledge that complexity. So when you're working in multi-solving, there are 5 things that every multi-solver needs to know. And one is that you often feel like you're the only one and that you're working alone, but you're not alone. And multi-solvement is a growing movement and a growing way of thinking, and we're really trying, we don't have any expertise internally on it, but we're trying to bring these ways of thinking into the work that we do. The second, when you work in multi-solving, is that you see the world as a whole. And indivisible. So instead of and the way our brains work and the way current systems work, even our finance software system chops things up into parts and departments and pieces. And that is a way of managing a lot of information, but it can also, it's artificial and it can become a distraction. So we try to really stay aware of that. When you're working in multi-solving, you're also working as a force for healing, building relationships, rewiring systems, and really focusing on more connection and increasing collective intelligence. Multi-solving also requires seeing connections, and sometimes seeing connections where maybe you wouldn't have normally seen them. Food, for example, things like thinking about food systems and recognizing that they also boost culture and cultural awareness. Clean energy sources aren't sustainable if they ultimately harm the workers who put them in place. So when you're thinking around connections, you're thinking about how parts fit into wholes and thinking about the whole. And they can't be healthy without healthy parts. So you have to be able to move back and forth between the whole and the parts and seeing those connections. And last, multi-solving work offers hope in uncertain times. So relationships really are a source of strength. You're creating trust and connection and taking advantage of opportunities. You're helping one another in emergencies, and you're trying to prepare systems to meet unknown and uncertain futures. So that's really the base approach that we are taking when we're trying to work on this budget and other problems facing our community. And we're doing that within a bit of a context. So we wanted to talk about the Canmore context and beyond. And I'll start a bit with a global context. And in the global context, right now there's all kinds of challenges that we're facing. So one is negativity online and social media, and more it's becoming more and more socially appropriate to attack people. That's a challenge, and it's not just a challenge we face here. Housing and affordability challenges are very real. They're extreme in Canmore, but we're not alone in that. We're not the only community facing that challenge. There's also just an increase of wicked problems. The number and type of wicked problems are on the rise. So things are less and less simple and have more and more complex solutions, and those complex solutions have unintended consequences, and it becomes all wrapped up. We all know that climate change is real, and that creates all kinds of fear for people about climate change. That's something that we have to look at. The state of politics everywhere, all across the globe, is challenged right now. There are significant international conflicts that, if you read the international news every day, are alarming and cause for great concern. There's an increase in global tourism. There's an increase in tourism in Canmore, but all across the globe, there's more and more tourism happening, and that has all kinds of effects. Florence has been making the news recently for what the locals are doing around what their perception is of too much tourism. So that certainly can affect communities. We're still coming out of pandemic recovery. It appears it may start to be leveling off, but it still does affect us. And for a long time, there was a global labor shortage. It looks like we might be leveling out a bit around that in Alberta, but that has been a real influencer in our budget process in Canmore. There's also the great exhaustion, which is a pervasive form of burnout that starts with stress related to some of those global problems and then spills over into work. And it piles on all of the wider anxieties about the state of the world, and then the state of your work, and social media pressures, virtual communication tools where people can, even if it's not our expectation, feel like they always are working or always need to be working. So there's a real concern about the state of the workforce. And it shows up in different statistics. So when there's reporting for burnouts, it's playing out a little bit differently across generations. 50% of millennials are reporting feeling burnt out, 51% of Gen Z, 32% Gen X, which, just to be clear, Wade, I am in Gen X, 24% of baby boomers, and generally 53% of workers in Canada have negative feelings about work, with 30% reporting being overwhelmed and tired. So those aren't statistics relative to the town of Canmore, but we're also trying to not be naive, and likely, again, these global contexts are having an impact on our workforce at the town as well, and we're trying to be aware of that. Then there's the provincial context. There's a lot happening across the province that influences us as well. And the first is aging infrastructure. Aging infrastructure in Canadian municipalities, and particularly in Alberta, is real. There's a lot of challenges around aging infrastructure across this province. Our municipal reserves are underfunded for the scope of that challenge. Partly the reason why they're underfunded is because of a significant decline in funding from the province to municipalities. That's creating real financial challenges for us around the capital program in particular. The province is working really hard to grow tourism. So their growth strategy has a $25 billion tourism industry by 2035. We know that a significant amount of tourism in Alberta is done on the mountains and mountain parks. So even if they work to support and promote tourism in other places, mountain communities are the backbone and the base for that tourism growth. We know with the significant growth in Calgary that many Calgarians tell us all the time that they see Canmore as part of their community and their backyard, and there's spillover even just from day trips from that. And there's still no tourism funding in Alberta. The last report from Ben Brunin indicated that 26% of Canmore's tax dollars are spent on some form of tourism infrastructure without any funding for the province for that. And then we also have an increase in education requisitions on Canmore tax bills. We saw that particularly big increase last year, and Chelsea, do you want to jump in? You were going to say something, I think, about education requisition, and if you're not prepared for, we can come back to it.
No, that's okay, and I can definitely provide the report after this. Thank you for that reminder. We have had our former assessors prepare a report for us. The province just released the equalized assessment information to support the 2025 tax year. And again, I shouldn't speak off the cuff, but I do want to say the increases we were looking at were per their estimate likely in the 10% range, even though the province continues to have messaging around holding their mill rates flat because of our high assessed values and the continued increases in our assessed values. We do continue to see higher than proportionate increases in our portion of the education requisition. And as Sally had alluded to, we don't see that come back to our education system. So that trend definitely continues, and I can provide some updated estimates we're looking at ahead of next year.
Perfect, thank you. And so with that, I think the mayor got an email sometime in the last year from a resident who noted the change in their tax bill. And they had a 41% increase on their tax bill, which they found completely unacceptable, especially this, I believe, was a retiree on a fixed income. And of course, the majority of that increase was actually due to the education requisition, but they were emailing the mayor because they get the tax bill from the town. So I've shared this quote with the management team as we were preparing budgets, just because it is, we know, a constraint that we have no control over, but that does affect our residents. And in addition to other things affecting our residents, there's also all that other context aside, there's also the Canmore context. So Canmore is also growing and changing very quickly. This is a report from, I believe it was a CBC story a couple of years ago when the national census came out about our growth. And then we know the organization feels those impacts. So I just pulled images of a bunch of new programs and services that have been implemented in Canmore in the last few years, last little bit. There's been a lot that's been going on. We've done a lot around trying to improve livability and affordability in the community. We've got numerous programs and services, and we're also working to build a whole community. And it's hard to grow and change everything at the same time. We can't do it all at once, and there's a bit of a lag. So we tend to bring things on in bits and pieces as we can, but sometimes that means making tough choices and trying to approach with consistency and equity over time, and recognizing the impact of change affects the whole community, but we have to work to understand that impact and address it in stages as we can. Oh yeah, solar, forgot that one. And then one of the things that we've done in the last little bit around growth is to think about people, new people in the organization as adding capacity, because they do. New people can do stuff. Like when we have ideas about what we want to do or programs or things that are a priority, we need people to do them. And so we have a default to bring in people in order to do more and to create new programs. But the reality is that we've, over the last several years, tended to default to bringing things in that are not tax funded. So they've been cost neutral because they come from the paid parking reserve, or they come from the development reserve, or they come from some other reserve. So it seems easy to add people. And it has been relatively easy to add people, and we've done great work by doing that. But the reality is we are now at a point where there's a bit of a lag with our tax-funded departments. So corporate services, which includes HR, IT, finance, municipal clerk, and communications, are all funded from taxes. So is community social development, arts and culture, fire, although we've invested significantly in fire. The facilities department and some of our public works and protective services departments are all funded from taxes. And as you bring on more and more people in paid parking or other departments, they all have an impact on corporate services especially. And there comes to be an incremental tipping point where we now have capacity challenges in those departments that are funded from taxes. And that's really a part of what this budget is also about. Because the reality is people are amazing, but people are also workload. And so we have 50 more full-time employees now than we had in 2019, which for an organization of our size is significant growth in a short time. And all 50 of those people had to be recruited, oriented, trained. Now that they're here, they're supported and they're managed. Our disability cases have doubled annually since 2020. Part of that great exhaustion is showing up in terms of other challenges in the workplace. So we're spending more and more of our HR department's time managing disability cases and employees being off work. Those cases are more complex and also require significant accommodation sometimes. Recruitment vacancies have more than doubled in 2020, in part because of affordability challenges and just a numbers game as the organization grows. There's more and more turnover in recruitment, and some people have the gall to retire, and then we have to replace them.
It's not too late.
And new people need things. New people need workspaces. They need computers and software. They need phones and tablets. They need vehicles. Council, I believe I shared with you at another time, but we saw in our IT department, other things are also getting more challenging, like cybersecurity. You know, we are averaging about 33,000 login attempts a week from across the globe, the main ones not coming from Canada. So the point is, all these departments in corporate services and facilities, we need all of those departments when we support new people. So even if the new program isn't tax funded, there's a significant amount of corporate support around new people. And we're at the point where we have to support that capacity as well. So in terms of, we thought we'd walk you a little bit through how we got to this moment and this meeting, the budget process, a little bit of past and present. And again, on the theme, we really tried to think differently and approach the budget a bit differently. There's a lot that's the same, but some of how the budget has historically worked is that we used to get, in previous councils, an indicative tax rate, usually it was a budget no more than 5%. That was what we usually saw. And then finance would kick off the budget process with all the departments. We'd develop operating and capital budgets in silos. Every department would go and do their work separately, and then we'd roll it all up. It would be way too much. And then the manager of finance, the general managers, and the CIO would sit in a room and work to whittle all of that down to an indicative tax rate. And a lot of times we got to the indicative tax rate by reducing contributions to reserve and cutting or eliminating performance pay for staff. And then we would bring that budget at that indicative rate to council. And council would do work too, but that was how we got there. And then Lisa DeSoto, my predecessor, when we brought in business transformation, started some really intentional shifts that we have all worked to carry forward. So instead of saying every year is a difficult budget year, which is true, it is, but we're trying to now be more purposeful and have conversations in advance so that not everyone's not working on a whole bunch of, over the summer to put together a budget, that the first thing we do is to start to redline. So we're trying to do more to have purposeful conversations, share opportunities and resources. We've moved from the best arguer around the table, you know, the person with the most words or the loudest words or most persuasive wins in terms of the budget, to really trying to look at the whole and thinking about the organization as a whole and having service-wide conversations and doing a bit of forecasting about what's coming. And we still have a lot of work to do there. And then from administration making decisions to get to a tax rate and limiting the work of council, what we've really done with you in the past 2 years is brought the realities of operations with options to you based on your priorities. And so that's continued with this budget as well. So the way it's working now is that there's no indicative tax rate. We're doing a status quo operating budget this year. And we asked people, what can you do with your current resources? The dollars you have and the people you have, what can you do? And then we did look at the positions already in the 2025 approved plan and a bit more need, and then we'll be presenting you with options for increases and decreases in operating. In capital, we tried to define our capital envelope, and it has shrunk from, it used to be closer to 17 or 18 million a year. I can't remember the exact number. Somebody can correct me if they remember. It's shrinking to a little less than 12 million a year. When we look at all of the funding sources for the various capital, we have about 12 million a year to spend. And we've had several pre-planning meetings, especially with the departments that do the most work in the capital budget, and really work together as a group to try to refine the capital budget. We've also tried to add inflation, something that we've never done in the capital budget, because we found when we make a big 6-year plan, if we do it in today's dollars and we extend today's dollars through the whole 6 years, by the time we're in year 3, there's been inflation and the numbers are out of date. So we're trying to work on adding inflation. It's a work in progress. And we're seeing things like 20% construction increase costs in Calgary. So trying to figure out how to factor those in as well. And then we worked with you to develop a service level inventory. We'll try, when we talk about options, to talk a bit about increasing and decreasing service levels. The service level inventory is just being finalized with the consultant, and we'll look at trying how we can incorporate that in future budget years. We did a little bit of informing on this process. And really what the point of that is to be able to explain what we provide and to what level. And then we're also starting to wrap our heads around forecasting and planning, and this is a space where we have a long way to go. So as you all know, we do now know that there will be future growth in Three Sisters, and we know what that roughly will look like. But we also know that we lack organizational models for managing growth. Teresa and I had a call with some staff in the city of Airdrie. They have a really interesting growth management department and growth models because they're looking at quarter sections. And they have growth models for how they're going to develop out in quarter sections. So it won't apply to us in the same kind of way, but we're trying to learn from other municipalities that are also growing significantly for how they're managing it. I found it helpful to learn that even the city of Calgary doesn't have a good equation for like how many new residents or how many new doors before you need a new person in CSD. There's no simple equation for that, right? But we don't have those kinds of models. We know we need non-market housing, and we're trying to forecast and plan for that. We know we have aging infrastructure and facilities that are requiring a lot of maintenance work. We're trying to plan for that. The RCMP has indicated that they need a new facility. We know the Public Works building needs either a significant reno or a complete rebuild. It's getting old. We know that we need our transportation mode shift. That should be managed, not manager growth. Fundamental to manage growth, we need mode shift in order for our transportation network to work, and that requires an investment. It's not going to happen on its own. We need to adapt to climate change. There's still, even though we've completed or near completed Cougar Creek, there's still significant flood mitigation work to happen in the community on a limited land base with even further limited town-owned lands to do some of this work on. And then there are community and council expectations. And when we are building operating programs, we're trying to reduce our operating impact. So when we do things like net zero buildings or other projects like that, we're trying to reduce our operating impact so that there's not as much of a demand on the operating budget. But sometimes all of these things mean there are competing priorities, and we don't have good models for forecasting and planning yet. But we're working on it. So basically, to get to this meeting today, our approach has been to keep calm and think long-term. And that's really, a part of what this budget process will be about is to talk to you about how we want to manage some of these competing priorities and challenges in a longer-term way. So that's the high-level context for how we got to this moment. I'm happy to answer any questions or have any conversation as you so wish.
Thanks for that, Sally. Yeah, that's a lot to think about, and so it's important for that stage to be set. Are there questions or comments that anybody have at this time before we break for lunch? Yeah, go ahead.
In terms of the capital budget envelope, how does grant funding fit into how we do that work? I know that just applying for grants to get money isn't what we do, but in terms of our long-term capital plan, how do we strategically leverage grants that are available so that envelope might, on a case-by-case basis, increase?
Expand. Yeah, well, Whitney, I'll give an initial answer, but feel free to jump in. I mean, one of the things you'll see it's a great question, when we bring you the capital budget, is we're trying to put things in the plan, even if they're potentially unfunded, that we know need to be done, so that we at least have them in a window. The other thing is sometimes we're making choices to fund studies or pre-design work. So a lot of times what we're seeing with new grants, other than the LGFF, is that it needs to be shovel ready and something that can go in a short time frame. So also thinking strategically about where it might be worth to invest in the pre-work so that if there's a grant strategy or funding that becomes available, we can go. But I would look to Whitney to add to that.
Yeah, no, I think that was a
good overview, and at the next regular council meeting, there's a report going forward to get council to approve a design project for precisely that reason, that then we can go forward with a grant that we're applying for. Who knows if we'll be successful, but one of the criteria is the project needs to be shovel ready for construction, which is really a challenging environment because it's not like we have a lot of construction detail design sitting on a shelf, because that also takes money, and why spend it if we don't have the money to do the project. So it's a bit of a chicken and egg. I would say generally, anytime we are aware of a grant that we could apply to any of our infrastructure projects, probably any of our projects, we apply for it and hope for the best. The challenge is we can't put things in the capital budget on an assumption that we'll get the grant funding. So when we put the capital budget together, we need to account for all of we need to be able to point to a funding source with an assumption that the grant won't be there, and then we can come back and adjust if we do get the grant, which is also challenging because we have a lot of competing priorities for scarce dollars.
I would just add that similar to our infrastructure funding, grants are less prevalent than they have been in the past. And some streams are starting to wind down on the transit side. In particular, we've seen in the next few years, we can anticipate that some of that funding won't exist at all. So it's again, that wicked problem situation, less funding up front and then less grants that we can actually apply for as well.
You'll see at the December meeting, we're bringing council, we need a recommendation or approval from council to apply for a grant as part of the grant condition. And we did a thorough analysis of our capital project and found several projects that we could apply for, but they'll only accept one, and it's a 3-year program, right? So we made some calls, tried to figure out what's the best one to apply for. Yeah.
I know there had been, in my memory, times when unfunded projects were not seen as a good thing in the budget, but I think that planning for some of these priority projects in the process so that we can leverage grant funding should it come up is a really smart move. So
Well, and I think it also helps to tell the story. Like if we took everything out that was unfunded, you wouldn't be able to see as council what we're actually choosing to not write. So I think that it's also an important part of this larger context setting is seeing all the things that were part of the discussion.
yeah, and it's really strategic.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I just want to say that I really appreciate the thoughtfulness that's going into the strategy of this new approach. You know, there are a lot of wicked problems. There are a lot of global context to these things, and I just want to say that. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Any other questions or comments? Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for great work, guys. I'm kind of always under the impression that we do it pretty good. Like I think we do a pretty good job keeping our house in order. So when I think about other places that maybe don't have the resources or the quality of staff or the culture behind it, like, is there someone that's doing it really well that is a great example? Or are we kind of like at the front end of that trying to figure it out? Is this just like something where we're like, everyone's going to collapse eventually, and so we're just going to hang in as best as we can? Like I'm curious on that,
Yeah.
on that side.
Sort of that. You do hear our auditors, typically when they bring the annual audited financial statements, they often will say, oh, your reserves are in great shape. They're comparing us to other municipalities. So our reserves are not necessarily where we need them to be for the asset repair and rehab that we need to do. But when compared to many others, we are in good shape. We are doing better than many of our other comparators. And we have strong teams that have great oversight of our infrastructure, what needs to happen, when they're creative with the best possible solution for the best dollars, the multi-solving approach. But this is a prevalent problem for sure across Canada. Not enough funding for the infrastructure needs that municipalities have.
Yeah, like when I hear like the city of Calgary needs $1 billion for like water infrastructure, I'm like, well, there's going to come a point where the entire country is falling apart, and there has to be a phase shift from higher levels of government to like understand it, because I think people at our level are really trying our best, but there comes a point where it is really, really like tough. Okay.
I think we're at that stage. Our community is fortunate that not all of our pipes are as old as many, but there are many communities that are way, way behind. And we're good to see that we are behind, and try to get our minds wrapped around that before we get to that other stage. But it is happening so much across the country that there is just lack of
Yeah,
infrastructure.
like there has to be a
funding.
siren call pretty loud soon from like everywhere, like infrastructure just can't be met.
Yeah. I know FCM is on that.
Yeah.
For sure.
It's transit operating as well. It's not just,
Yeah, like all these people.
Yep.
Vancouver right now is at a point that Vancouver right now is at a point where they have been living off of their reserves for the last 4 years, and if they don't get an injection of funding, they're gonna have to cut like 20% of their transit service, which is like cray-cray in a city like that. So,
If I can just add on to that answer too, we've been talking at CST about this, that, and it aligns with old ways aren't serving us, the world is changing, and we need to change how we respond to that. And I do think you'll see it on the operating side and definitely on the capital side. Really, the discussion now is more about where is it okay to let service levels slide, and where is it okay to accept more risk than we typically would have. It's not about here's all the work we need to do, how we're going to pay for it. We know we can't pay for it all. So it's about where can we let service levels slide and where can we accept more risk. And that is really, you'll see that when we get to those discussions.
All right, well, I think it's time for a lunch break. It's 12:10, let's return at 1:10. Is that good? Okay. please. All right, we're back. And next agenda item is D5, provincial downloading.
My favorite.
There's one in your binder, this is the replacement for.
Yeah, there was one in the package and in your binder, but we also have a replacement, so did you get the replacement?
This is a replacement of the one in the binder
Yes,
that Ben gave you.
perfect.
That's the good one. You can tell the old one because it has a little blue line at the bottom. And the new one does not have the little blue line.
Anyway, I'll walk you through it, and then you can tell us if you need another copy. So, provincial, this is there's no presentation, I'm just gonna walk you through the provincial downloading sheet. This, as you know, is the third iteration of this form, and it just highlights and tracks various forms of provincial downloading. Many of it is a repeat. I thought what I would do is just walk you through what's new. So if you look on the first page, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 line down, the change from what was originally in your package in your binder is the disaster recovery program. Just earlier this morning, we were in a meeting and had a presentation.
The last section, other information, I believe. Okay, so if it has no blue line, it's the red one.
Yep, do you need a new one? I can help you with a new one. There you go. Okay, so if you go to the 6th line, the first 5 lines are repeats from previous years, just with the number or the comments updated. The disaster recovery program, DRP it's also known as, so we used DRP during the flood to pay for all of our emergency operations. That now is switched to a 90-10 model. So instead of the province paying 100% of the disaster recovery costs, they're changing the equation, and municipalities will have to pay 10% of all recovery costs. So that doesn't have any implications for us yet, but should there be any kind of natural disaster or a state of local emergency in Canmore that has costs, that will have an impact on us. There's also some additional changes, like one of the things that was flagged, if there's to be some kind of major event from having the G7 nearby that creates an emergency scenario in our community, that is not covered by the DRP. So there's been some changes to what is and is not covered in the DRP, and we just thought we should, because we just had it this morning, we should capture it. You should put your mic on.
If there was a G7 incident and it's not covered by DRP, what's the recourse?
I mean, presumably we're paying for it, and then we're getting into conversations and negotiations with other levels of government for support.
Okay.
Yeah.
Those conversations can't be had prior a little bit? Just say, hey,
They
just so
might.
you know, we're being in the wind here with the province.
I mean, yeah, I don't, go ahead, Scott, yeah.
I mean, we're working with organizers for that event currently, so it's something that we can bring up.
Please, please bring that up.
It's also difficult, I mean, like, what's the event?
Right.
You know, it could be something that's covered by insurance. Could be something that is covered by a different program. It's tough
The
to
goal will be no events. Yeah. But anyway, it just was flagged this morning, and we thought since we were having this conversation, we should add it. No financial impact to the town yet, but. Then the very next line, we've captured the changes to victim services.
Dr.
Oh, go ahead, sorry.
Thank you.
Blind spot.
I know, I can tell.
You're in it.
Any idea what this DRP program is gonna cost Jasper? Structured this way?
Yeah, go ahead.
Put your mic on.
Oh, sorry. Is that better?
That's better.
I'm glad.
Scott wouldn't have
When we were
forgotten.
talking about it this morning at the senior leadership team, Andy, as you know, who helped out in Jasper, indicated that the total submission was $150 million worth of recovery funding. So Jasper's share of that is $15 million, which is about their entire operating, or
That's
sorry,
their
their
entire
entire
operating budget,
capital budget in a year. So they're really strapped.
Yeah.
to figure out how they're gonna cover that.
And they also, a third of their tax base is not paying taxes right now.
Right.
So it's, yeah, significant. It'll be significant.
Yeah.
Thank you for that context.
Okay, the very next line, we noted the changes to victim services. So historically, we have been contributing to the local chapter of victim services. With the switch to the regional model, as of now, there's actually a savings to the town because we're not making that contribution. This year, we'll be monitoring the impact of that regionalized service to see if there is any increased workload demand to the town, and we'll be reporting on that in future years. The next line is just, again, the no indexing for our FCSS staff. That's not new, but just wanted to flag it. Our mandatory municipal contribution is 20%, and we're well over that to be able to keep service levels and to keep staff on the salary grid. And then the very next line, again, is also the cancellation of ParentLink. That's just a similar but different story. I guess we have less funding but more accountability with the Family Resource Network in terms of programs that we need to provide and significant funding. If you go then to page 2, the last 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines, all above the yellow bar. So this category, we've put these into categories. We're in the funding formula and program changes. So I'll just flag grant reductions. This is grants in place of taxes. Or no, sorry, this is MSI. So we've just separated out LGFF and MSI in those 2 lines. So the first we were tracking, when we first started doing this, we were tracking reductions in MSI funding. MSI with this year has now officially been replaced with LGFF, so that's captured on 2 separate lines. To the comment this morning with Ms. Gibbons made around education tax, we've made some preliminary assumptions based on the information we have there around education tax and the impacts that'll have on taxpayers. One bit of good news is the line on preferential debt servicing. So you may recall in the past, municipalities did get a preferential debt servicing, and then a few years ago, 2020, I think, that was changed. The province has indicated, and I believe the Premier spoke about this at Alberta Municipalities, that we will be going back to preferential debt servicing rates. We haven't seen yet what that looks like or how that'll play out, but it is something that we're tracking. And then we have added the very last line above the next yellow box is the municipal election. You'll see when we walk you through operating budget, there's a significant increase in the cost to run the election because of the need to hand count ballots.
So in the, just going back to the preferential debt servicing, in the previous years, we didn't have any amounts to claim in there?
And we should be putting the amounts in. I don't know if we've done the math to figure out the difference. Go right ahead.
And sorry, this was while I was away, but when I was looking at this to fill out the spreadsheet, I don't think we actually ended up taking any debt through the province during that window. Okay. So we actually never did have an impact. The only debt we took during that period was the debt through FCM for the fire hall, so not under the provincial program. So I actually think we have no dollar value.
Okay, well, that's good, because it is good to keep it in there if it was there, because the cumulative impact is massive.
Significant, yeah. Yeah, then if we move into the next yellow box category, provincial requirements, just, again, the first 4 are the same. Wanted to flag the 5th line there under wastewater treatment plant regulatory changes. This, and again, we'll talk about this when we talk about the utility model, but we're being required to upgrade the wastewater treatment plant to include effluent and nitrogen and phosphorus removal. So we'll talk more about that as that budget time, but that is a provincial requirement. The mayor has requested that be waived, and a meeting with the Minister of Environment, and we're not hearing back on that. Go ahead, Ms. Smithers.
I just wanted to flag that the costs represented here are just the detailed design costs. This is not about construction dollars yet.
Yeah, because the total is
even more.
around 40 million.
Yeah.
So this is just.
It's just
detailed
not
design.
we're not reporting on budget years, right? So more to come. Okay, under impacts from lack of provincial resources.
Okay, just before
yeah,
we
go
move
ahead.
on then.
Yep.
Maybe I'm not seeing it, or maybe I can't. What about body worn cameras? Is that going to cost us something? By the
For RCMP. Yeah, that is. We should add that.
Yeah.
Yeah, we just got the invoicing for that.
Yeah, okay.
Can you look into that, Mr. McCarthy? He can look into it and we can send you another updated version, yep.
Thank
Okay.
you.
That it?
Yep, thank
Then
you.
we're on to impacts from a lack of provincial resources. Great news on the first line. We've removed feral rabbit management from the budget, not because of anything we did or the province did, but nature took its course. And then we've also added this line about COs and fish or wildlife resources. We're having to rely more and more on RCMP and municipal enforcement for wildlife management within the town boundary, so wanted to flag that. And then the very last item, so you'll see there's a total and then there's another yellow section. So the totals there indicate what has been mostly standard in this reporting for the last couple of years and those few changes I've highlighted. But I also thought it might be worth highlighting tourism infrastructure and the lack of funding there. So the amount that's in every column, we haven't done any indexing for current current numbers. It's taken from the 2021 economic impact analysis that indicates that 26% of our taxpayer dollars support tourism infrastructure. We thought it was important to capture on this list, but also likely worth separating it out slightly. So there's the initial total and then the combined total if you add in that tourism number from 2021. So that's it. Any other comments, questions, or things we missed? Yeah, go ahead.
Do we find this to be a helpful collection of information to plan with?
Yeah, I think administratively, it's helpful in terms of keeping track of a number of things. I think it's the bigger help is honestly outside of administration and more in the political realm. I know it's been talked about and used at both mid-sized cities and Alberta municipalities, and so I think it's helping with larger conversations about provincial funding and some of those issues. I mean, for us administratively, it is helpful to be able to talk about, and occasionally in conversations with the province or other communities, we are using it and referring to it.
And I think we're a little bit ahead of the curve here. We started collecting this, and we were one of the ones to raise it with AB Munis. AB Munis has it on their radar and has asked it for information. And I think through those sorts of efforts, more communities are starting to collect. Just this morning, I sent ours to Camrose because they're looking to start tracking it, and was yesterday on a call was asking if others had samples. And so Grand Prairie and myself said we would send ours, and so they could use that for whatever it's worth to them. I think that this will get to the point where we reach a point where many are collecting this information, and then we'll have a much stronger advocacy effort because we have the numbers. Yeah. Yeah.
I really like how it's laid out in the different sections and how the different things impact us. Yeah. And what I like as well too is that all of these line items are spread throughout a really big budget. So being able to contextualize this particular pressure on our budgets, provincial downloading, I think is really good. And the change in the number from 2023 to 2024 is quite surprising. So,
Yeah.
Then what percentage of our budget is this number?
Well, a 1% tax increase this year is $349,000. So, and some of these are capital, right? Like LGFF is capital,
Right.
some is operating, so it's a
Right.
little bit, but for context, 1% is $349,000. So, a lot.
What I've done is, once we have a final number of what we are taxing for, I use this number over that number to create the fraction that we actually tax for provincially to cover the provincial downloading.
Yeah.
In the past, I've quoted that one out of $7 taxed is because of the provincial downloading. I think it's going up now.
Yeah, and if you wanted to cover it, in terms of the known impact in 2023, that would be about a 12% tax increase if you just wanted to cover it. I mean, if we're right on what we think the impact will be for 2024, to get to $9 million would be a lot of tax increase. It's a lot of tax increase.
And if we were to push these back onto the province,
Well, sure, we could send them a bill.
or stop doing the things that they're asking us to do.
Some of the things we could stop doing, but like, we can't control how much traffic fine revenue they take, right? They're
Right.
right, and we can't, the LGFF is used to fund infrastructure, when we still need pipes and roads and all those, so, it would mean yeah.
And
There are some things that are,
The ones that we
Uncontrolled
continue,
discretion.
the ones that we continue to fund, though, the ones that get hurt if we get pushed back are our residents.
And our staff.
And so-
And our staff.
Yeah, and staff, I mean, so if it's FCSS funding that we stop, who does that hurt?
Sure.
Most vulnerable in our community. If we stop responding to medical calls, who does that hurt or kill? Our residents. And so it's not as easy to say, well, we just won't do it.
it's not as easy, but it is their responsibility.
Yeah, but we have to, we can't just say it's not our responsibility and therefore we're gonna let people die.
I don't think that's what we're saying at all.
If we don't respond to medical things, yes.
Yeah, there's tough decisions to be made there, and
Yeah.
a lot of fingers that could be pointed, certainly.
It's complicated. No, I appreciate your flagging it. I mean, I do think it is a good question, and I'll say for a long time, we didn't fund staff in FCSS or Parent Link at that time. We just met the minimum contribution. We didn't do anything over and above. And for me, it was when I was in Mr. Mackay's role, and I saw an employee from our then Parent Link Center working her third job on a Saturday, where I, felt like, okay, I've got to ask council to do this thing because, this isn't good for her. It's not good for the community she serves, and it's, anyway. So,
Certainly.
but you're right. I mean, council, there are some things where we do have some discretion that council could exercise. I think what Mayor Krauser is raising is that we have to weigh the consequences of those things. Yeah.
As does the province.
As does the province. Go ahead.
I think too as well, a lot of the things that we go above on align with our values and supports our community. And I appreciate the debate around potentially pulling back on some of these. But I don't think the point would be made to the province. I think what we're doing with this itemization and creating this document and creating the dialogue provincially, that's what's going to make the difference with the province. So I think we're on the right track.
Here's hoping.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Here's hoping. So we'll add body-worn cameras, send you another one, or we'll just bring it to whatever. We'll get it to you somehow. Yeah.
Off the top of my head, 20 to 30,000?
Yeah.
Total, right? Not per.
For the camera detachment.
That was it from me on that item.
All right, then, we will then move to our last item of the day, which is strategic plan review, policy review, and economic update.
Perfect. Those are actually 3 items smushed into one. So I'm going to do the first,
Okay.
and then Ms. Gibbons and Ms. Rogers will each do one as well. So I'm here to talk to you today, and this is this presentation that went around with your lovely faces on it, of the strategic plan implementation. So just thought, again, before we launch into the 2025 and 2026 budget, would remind you a little bit about what we've done so far to implement your strategic plan, which spans 23 to 26. So we're almost 2 years into fully implementing your strategic plan. Want to review what was part of your last budget and also give you a little bit of a sneak peek of some of what you'll see in this budget around that. So again, just as a reminder, after the election, and you had to approve the 2022 budget right away. Then we worked with a consultant called It's Logical, and we spent 3 days developing your 2023 to 2026 strategic plan. You developed a vision, goals around livability, environment, and relationships, 3 foundational pillars of financial stewardship, human resources, and community engagement, and 3 to 4 results that you were looking for, or objectives that you were looking for under each of those goals. And this is the visual that's accompanies your strategic plan from its logical. And that the circled area at the top, community vision and council strategic plan, is really the realm that council works in. And that's what we did to create that strategic plan. And then council gave us a motion in 2022 that wanted us to return in the fall when we were doing the 2023 budget with ideas for bold initiatives that would address livability and environment in Canmore. I don't know what just happened. Oh, okay. Including but not limited to increasing income appropriate housing and affordability. And so then we got to work on this section that's circled here around corporate business plans, which is something we historically haven't had at the town. And so we made an attempt to do that. It was new to us, and we took a collective work with management at how we could address that. So we did a big inventory of what we're already doing, and we generated options of things that we could do, and then talked about how we would measure that. We had 3 different meetings with managers, one around livability, one around environment, and one around relationships and foundational pillars, and really had them blue sky and work to clarify BOLD was. And then also got clear, we came up with a lot of ideas of things that were not in the municipal purview, and agreed we would really just take on what was ours to take on. And so we worked to define BOLD, which is that it wasn't for just the sake of being audacious, that it really required courage or political will in the face of barriers or oppositions, that it was beyond the limits of conventional thought or action. It's not for its own sake, but it is on behalf of something larger, that there's a benefit to the community. And then we created an implementation plan. So we generated a list of high-impact actions that would move the needle on each of your 3 goals. We assigned a lead department and collaborators, and we worked together to plan resources for those actions. And then we created the implementation plan. We incorporated it into the budget and presented it to you as part of the 2023 process. And now today we'll walk through some updates for the 2025-26 and then some options for you to consider. So I'm gonna really briefly mention some options today. When we actually get into the operating budget, the GMs will walk you through those options in more detail, and then I'll provide a high overview summary of all the options. So if you hear about an option today that you're interested in, there's more to come. We don't have all the detail today, but it's coming. So you don't have to remember it all from today. And then we did the work, or managers did the work of preparing department budgets and business plans, all part of this. And then one of the things that we've done since all that work on the strategic plan in the last 2-year budget was we did some work around measuring. So you'll recall we worked with a local expert in organizational measurement and developed OKRs, or outcomes and key results, to be able to report back to you on how we're doing at implementing your strategic plan. And since that work with that local consultant, we've provided quarterly updates to you at committee of the whole meetings of your OKRs and updates on implementing the strat plan. So today really is just a high-level summary, again, as part of the budget. So if we look at what we've done or what we're planning to do to implement livability, your first objective was that municipal initiatives and services are designed to increase affordability for residents. And the first thing we wanted to do here was expand housing to focus on increasing housing stock, a regulation of occupant type, and different models of providing housing. So you've increased the funding at CCH and also given them some direction around potential changes to programs and stock and mandate. So they saw a $250,000 increase in 2024 that was funded from the Vital Home Reserve. We'll have to move that into the budget in 25, and then for 25 and 26, they'll be presenting a cost of living increase to support CCH. We purchased a home in town for staff accommodation that is currently at capacity with staff both from the town of Canmore and BVRH living in that home. We're looking at a mortgage helper program for town of Canmore employees that's in the work plan for 2025 for finance and HR. It doesn't have any budget implications at this time. More to come on that. We're looking at housing intensification downtown through the Downtown ARP project, and that'll come to council for more conversation and decision. And we provided additional congregate living opportunities through funding Happy Pad from the Economic Development Reserve. You should interrupt me at any time as people have questions. We also work to expand housing. So in 2024, the Housing Action Plan was created. The Livability Task Force met in 2023 and have created a tax program in 2024 that you'll hear more about. And then we have significant planning underway for the parcel in the Mustache Lands. We've increased participation in and access to the Affordable Services Program. You funded that as part of the 2023 operating budget in the Community Social Development Department. And also in your last go-round of the budget, you converted the Safe Park pilot to a permanent program. That program this summer was at capacity with waiting lists. So it's definitely had an impact on summer housing during peak season. And then you'll see in this budget, there'll be an option to provide home support for seniors who are part of our Affordable Services Program. There'll be an option to increase support for community grants and also to continue community safety and education initiatives currently funded through Photo Radar. Those are options that you'll see in this budget that help support this objective. The second objective under livability was around emergency management communication that's effective and adopted across the community. So as you know, we've implemented the Voyant Alert notification system. We did that in 2023 through the Protective Services budget. We've developed winter and summer emergency response plans for unsheltered individuals, and that was funded in 2023, and the work was done by Protective Services and Community Social Development. And there'll be an option in this budget to hire a regional emergency management coordinator in a shared position with the town of Banff to further this objective. Objective 3 under livability is that municipal programs, facilities, and services help to attract and retain families. I don't know how we would do that. And support community diversity. This is a cut and paste from 2 years ago, so clearly. Anyway. So we've been working in the organization to advance efforts to eliminate systemic discrimination. And currently we have a consultant working in a reconciliation, equity, diversity, inclusion advisor role on contract. We've also worked to increase accessibility in town facilities. There was a study funded in the facilities capital budget that has not been advanced, and we'll have some further conversation when we get to the capital budget about why that is and what we want to suggest we do instead. And then also a similar thing around examining universal washrooms. It is funded in the budget, but it has not been advanced. And we'll talk more about that when you see the capital budget. That'll make more sense. On the same objective, we've also created low or low-cost programs that provide alternative childcare. So in 2023, you funded a program in community social development that's working to do that. And then we've worked to increase free outdoor activity and options for the community. So we funded an outdoor ice surface. You funded an outdoor ice surface in the Three Sisters area. And in the budget, there'll be options to replace the dog park at Palliser, which is moving because of the CCH project there. And a washroom at the sports fields in Three Sisters is also, I think, currently funded in the budget. And then the last objective under livability is employment opportunities that provide residents with a dignified and reasonable standard of living. So we implemented a labor market strategy in 2023. We are working on options to reduce the living wage for town employees as an employer. And that's it for livability. Does anybody have any questions on what we've done so far there? Then we'll move on to what we've done so far to implement your environment goal. So your first objective is around wildlife encounters and that they are reduced within our footprint, and unauthorized human use is similarly reduced. So we've advocated for the wildlife fence on the TCH through Canmore, and that's been successful, that advocacy. The fence installation is coming in 2025. We've worked with the biosphere to increase education enforcement through collaboration with the province, And in 2023, we developed a funding agreement with the biosphere to make sure we were clear on who was doing what and really align our working together with them. So it's been very efficient and effective to have that in place. And then we've created town actions from the Human Wildlife Roundtable recommendations. So there was some funded things in the 2023 capital budget, and then there'll be additional items that are currently unfunded in the capital plan to capture that. Same goal, we've actively removed plants on town lands known to be wildlife attractants. That project was completed in 2024 with funding that council included in the budget. Feral rabbit removal is complete, go ahead.
Can you define complete as far as,
We've spent the money.
thank you.
Yeah.
We haven't got rid of the problem, we've spent,
On the feral rabbits,
feral rabbits, yeah.
we fully completed the work on town lands that were funded. Yeah, so
there's-
that
but there's
doesn't
still
mean
work to
all
do.
the fruit is gone.
Right.
But what the high priority and funding from council has fully been implemented.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I think. Okay, objective 2, Canmore as a community collaborates to reduce our impact on climate change and prepare for climate action. So the sustainability department updated and consolidated a bunch of our different plans and presented you with the climate emergency action plan that came to council. So that's been completed, and then there'll be funding you'll see in the budget to take actions from that plan. And also there'll be an opportunity to look at a position that helps us reduce some of the actions around energy in our town facilities and other places. Energy retrofits for the Affordable Services Program participants was implemented in 2024. It's part of your carry forward budget in 2025. So Public Works has implemented 1 year of that and will continue to do that in 2025. And then objective 3, the community is aware of the town's environmental leadership. So we did look at other places we could install solar panels, and there is an unfunded capital project in facilities for solar panels on the salt shed in Elk Run. We've tried to be really explicit about how our organization's actions and initiatives demonstrate our leadership. So in 2023, we funded a proposed budget through with the biosphere, and then we have a new position in the budget for 2025 that would work on furthering this initiative to be more explicit about our environmental leadership. And then we still have in the budget, it's been in since 2023, an NRCB review of the Silvertip gondola. This is linked to the South Saskatchewan Regional Plan, and that this project hasn't been able to move forward because the application for the gondola at Silvertip is contingent on that plan, but that plan is now being open and the province has begun engagement. So we expect in 2025 that we'll be able to participate in that NRCB review around the Silvertip gondola. So that will remain in the budget even though no funds have been spent yet. And then you'll also see options around a position to reduce community waste and improve recycling practices, and that comes out of the waste audit report that was at council earlier this week, and a position to take on carbon budgeting for the organization. More to come on those. And then the last objective under environment was around safe multimodal transportation and how we're advancing that shift. One was to update the transit plan with service requirements to achieve mode share by 2030. And so you funded several new services through the Transit Commission. The local Quarry Lake Grassy route started this year, increased regional transit service was increased, and weekday and weekend local service was also increased in previous budgets. And in 2025, there'll be 2 options. One is a further expansion of midday regional service and a year-round expansion of the Quarry Lake Grassy route starting in late 2025. You also have done a lot around programs to facilitate encourage mode shift by removing barriers. So in the 2024 engineering capital budget, there were several programs around speed reduction and traffic calming, additional pay park zones, an e-bike rebate, and trail signage. There's also, you'll see as an option in the 2025, a sustainability capital budget to continue with the e-bike rebate. And then there's been work around completing the outstanding network gaps ahead of mode shift goals, and this has been funded with current practices in engineering, and you could always give that more money and escalate the pace of the program. And then advocating for a Palliser Trail crossing at the Trans-Canada. That's currently in the capital budget, you'll see, but it's unfunded. And partially the timing of when it's in the budget is linked to anticipated development in the Palliser area. And then increasing paid parking revenue to assist with the offsetting costs of multimodal shift. You did increase peak season rates on weekends and added paid parking at the boat launch in the last year. And there'll be multiple options presented to you around paid parking and photo radar, along with a potential service level increase for clearing paved trails and sidewalks in the winter. Yeah, which gets us on to relationships, the larger goal of relationships. The first one objective is around right relations with the Stoney Nakoda and members of Treaty 7. So we did hire, as I mentioned, the advisor who's working with us around advancing those relationships and our organizational commitment. It's ongoing with no budget implications to encourage developers to work with Indigenous communities around how they name streets and subdivisions. And then also ongoing with no budget implications is looking at signage, space for ceremony, those kinds of things. There is, that's the same one, sorry, double. We also have invited all Treaty 7 nations to at least one event in Canmore every year, and that's been funded in the operating budget through elder fees and protocol. And then there'll be an option in the budget to permanently fund the Indigenous market. The last 1 or 2 years at the National Indigenous Peoples Days event, we've been able to host a market, but it's been grant funded. So if we want to continue that with a guarantee, there'll be a funding option for you in the budget to do that. The second objective under relationships has been around intergovernmental, business, and nonprofit relationships in mutually beneficial outcomes. So we've been advocating to the province for revenue tools around visitor-based economies. You all know this. There's some text there about what has happened, but there's no update on that, no outcome to report yet. We've really worked to increase intermunicipal collaboration throughout the Bow Valley. I'm really thrilled that we have a much improved relationship with the MD of Bighorn, and we continue to work on ongoing collaboration with other municipalities. The mayor and I have attended several leadership meetings with the CAOs and mayors or reeves from everywhere from KID all the way to Lake Louise. Really lots of good conversation and efforts at working together happening. There'll be an option for you around a Main Street pedestrian zone gateway in this upcoming budget. And then objective 3 around meaningful two-way engagement is civil, substantive, and productive. We've really focused on expanding public input opportunities. So as you know, Connect Downtown was likely our highest, most successful engagement, well-loved ever. We've had an open house on the livability tax program, multiple town hall events led by the mayor, including one last night, had 100+ people. We'll work on increasing opportunities for public input by establishing a citizen input panel that's planned with the new position if the communication position goes through. And then we've also created an online community service portal through our website. That's a way for the public to inquire and report issues, and that was done as part of our website platform update. And then the last objective in this category is that the community understands the value of a strong and healthy public service. And we wanted to try to communicate the work being done by key areas in the organization. And so the communication, that's part of the Big Stories launch that the communication department recently did, is to look to tell a story of things happening at the town in a slightly different way. And then last is your foundational pillars. So we protect the long-term interests of residents by managing our assets and financial resources well. We haven't been able to review asset depreciation policies through a circular economy lens yet, but we are doing some work on asset management software, and there's a position in the finance department, so this may come in future years. Properly invest in asset rehab and maintenance. As you know, significant capital investment is needed in order to do that. And the current capital funding envelope, as we said earlier, is getting a bit smaller. So we'll talk more about that around the capital budget. Also around financial stewardship is the long-term financial strategy. It is in the capital budget for 2024, but it was delayed due to the livability tax program work, but we will be advancing that in 2025. So more to come on that. And a service level review with, that we want to use to help us with budgeting in the future is being completed this year. Council had a workshop recently with a consultant, and we're just finalizing that, and we'll figure out how to use it for future budget process. Appropriately manage assets in an increasingly complex world. Yes, I mean, that's part of what we were talking about this morning. And again, we'll talk more about that through the operating and capital budgets. Explore opportunities to align investments with council goals through impact investing. This is something we've been talking with the Banff Canmore Community Foundation. They're working on an impact investing program and need to get that launched, and then there'll be more to report. There's no budget impacts at this time. And then last is to revisit the property tax task force. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, so is that like community bonds? Is that what that is?
No, I don't think that's what that is. That is that you'd put money into the BCF, into a trust, and they would use it to help. For example, they might give money to somebody who's trying to build non-market housing, and while you're waiting for your FCM grant and your CMHC money or other funders to come in, they would bridge the money. So it's a zero interest loan that you'd get from the foundation, and then as soon as you get your grants or start generating revenue, you pay the money back with no interest, and they reinvest it somewhere else.
So it's kind of like community bonds.
I mean, I don't know that that's how bonds work.
That's exactly how they were just explained to me.
Okay,
this past
yeah,
week,
I
so
guess I
that's why
don't know
was
enough
curious.
about community bonds
Yeah,
to know.
perfect. All
But
right,
that's
thank
what, yeah, that's
Well,
what,
there's no individuals involved in like
No.
purchasing bonds or anything. It's actually using like reserve monies while they're not needed to do these things, and then they come back to the town.
yeah, through BCF is looking to organize it. And then with the property tax task force, same idea, that's in the 2024 budget, it's delayed to 2025 as we did the livability program instead. You'll see options in this budget to potentially add a municipal census in 25, 27, or 28, or all those years really if you want to. And the benefit of doing a municipal census is now that the province will count a municipal census towards your grant numbers. So if your community is growing, it can be beneficial to potentially do a census because it means more, it has an impact on the LGFF equation. And then there are also 2 cybersecurity options that you'll see to increase the protection and remove vulnerabilities from our IT system. And those will come to you in this budget cycle. Oh my gosh, we're still on financial stewardship. No.
No, you duplicated the slide, maybe.
I'm pushing the wrong button. Yeah, it's me. The problem is not the slides, the problem is me. I mean, the problem is Wade. Pillar number 2 is financial or human resources, that people and culture are our strongest assets. We are inclusive and connected. So around recruiting and retaining staff through the cost of living, what you'll see in this budget, so originally in the 2025 budget that you're approving for the interim is 2%. COLA has actually come in for the last year at 3.9. So the interim budget that you're doing will include the 2%, but we won't do anything with that until you formally approve the budget, and what'll come to you formally for approval is to increase that to 3.9%. And then right now, and I believe it'll be Chelsea who talks about this a bit more, the economic impact is suggesting we keep it at 2% for 2026. So that's what we've done in the 2-year budget. Stay tuned, more to come. In terms of re-examining the 55% pay policy, we have a council workshop in February, and so HR is working on some options to present to you as part of that policy workshop for what that could look like. Implement recommendations of the 2022 Reconciliation, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Organizational Audit. The audit was completed, and again, we have somebody working on that. And then prioritize leadership development. So the budget plan has HR positions added in 23, 25, and 26 to account for increased recruitment demand and to add capacity in HR to free up staff to help with leadership training development programs. And then one of the other things was to look at the RCMP staffing increase request. There are no changes in this current plan. In fact, there's a little bit of a dip with the RCMP. But long-term, we do know that we need a new facility, and it is currently unfunded in our capital plan. Do you have a question about that?
How do we know we have a need? for that? What is defining that need?
Yeah, partially it's just the natural life cycle of an asset. So the RCMP facility was built at about the same time as the old fire hall. And if you go into that facility on a tour at all, they are busting at the seams and don't have room. There's also standards have changed for how people who are being questioned or held are moved through a building, and our building is way behind on those standards in terms of officer and other worker safety. So it's a normal part of life cycle maintenance. The RCMP has also sent us a letter as per our contract saying it's time to start talking about a new building.
Thank you very much.
Did I miss anything there? Okay. And then the last pillar is around community engagement. We meaningfully engage with citizens for effective decision making. So as a reminder, in the 2023 operating budget, you include resources to help us with regular measuring of your OKRs and this implementation plan. And then if you look at relationship result number 3, that's also around community engagement. So there's a lot summarized there. You'll have an option in the budget for a refresh of our community brand. And that's it. That's really a high level. We've done a lot to be implementing your strategic plan, and there'll be more to come in this budget. So details to come. Are we going to do a switcheroo here, you and me? Okay. You're stuck.
Okay.
Did I break it?
I guess we're done for the day. Oh. You're so clever.
I love a fresh new binder.
Oh my God.
Good luck. Oh.
What did I do with my phone now? Oh, yeah, thank you. It's okay, I can follow along here. So just wanted to give an overview for you again of the policies that impact budget. There are a number of things that occur organically throughout the organization annually based on previous decisions that you've made. So we don't typically in a budget process ask you to reapprove the fact that we provide water, recycling, garbage pickup, those kinds of things. Those regular services that are part of what the municipality provides to the community, you've approved and they carry on. We have some policy set up that essentially does the same kind of thing, and it's largely to ensure a bit of efficiency in what's happening, and so that not every decision needs to come to you. I think we'd probably have to add a bunch of staff if we had to come with every decision. So you philosophically approve at a high level how things will unfold. And what I wanted to review today with you was what those things are and when and how we come to you for different approvals. So it's Section 7 of your binder. 2, 4, 6 policies that I'll go through with you, just again at a high level. So starting on page 2, the Finance Committee bylaw establishes your role as a Finance Committee. The bylaw sets out what authorities you have as a Finance Committee and for which things you as a committee make recommendations to council for final decision. So what you did this morning in meeting with and appointing the auditor is an authority of the Finance Committee. Reviewing the budget, making amendments, making changes, and then making recommendations to council for approval is really the main function of your committee throughout the year. We do review with you at this committee level debt statistics. Pardon me, and you're also authorized to review and approve financial policies. That is also something that council can do and does. So we've got, I think, on the agenda in January, a review of the budget amendment policy. Then in February, when you're functioning in your role as council and we have a policy workshop, you'll be reviewing some additional finance policies. So that one can come in both places. The budget amendment policy on page 6 outlines the authorities that the CAO has to make changes on approved budgets, typically within the year for the year. There's some implications around operating, pardon me, some implications around capital, and the limits of what the CAO can authorize are outlined within that policy. Anything that's outside of that comes to you for approval. And you'll recall throughout the years that we will come sometimes with a scope change to a capital project, or if we have a significant increase required on a capital project. Those decisions still come to you. There's a smaller threshold that the CAO can approve, but anything that becomes significant then comes back to you for council approval. And as I mentioned, we'll bring an update to this policy to the Finance Committee in the new year. We have a debt management policy. So council, a number of years ago, from a financial conservative perspective, established borrowing limits that are lower than what the MGA allows municipalities to approve. Council can always decide to borrow beyond those limits. It's your policy. You have the authority and the ability to change that decision at any time. And when we review capital, we always bring you the debt statistics as well, so that you can have a picture of how much debt we have currently on the books, how it relates to this internal limit that you have set, and then also how it relates to the Municipal Government Act established limit. Those debt limits are based on revenue, so the amount that can be borrowed over time grows as your tax base and tax revenue grows over time. Just as a reminder, borrowing costs directly impact the operating budget. So we talked earlier about the lending rates that the province provides. Those costs, when we take debt, go right into the operating budget. So just wanted to flag that from an impact perspective. And then, as was discussed earlier, the province announced in October that municipalities will now pay the same interest rates as the province does going forward. So that's a good thing for us, yeah.
Mr. Rogers, can you remind me what our self-imposed limit is? Is it 75%?
70.
70?
Yeah.
Thanks.
Page 17, we have the property tax policy. Our largest source of revenue for the town is property taxes. So that's why this fits within your budget process. And just as a reminder, we updated this policy on November 5th, where we made the change to remove the tourist home personal use option, and we added language around the livability tax program. We have a reserves policy on page 20. Also recently came to council for some updates, and what we updated there was adding the livability tax program and how those reserve funds could be used to support affordability and livability initiatives moving forward. And we also formalized incorporating the approach that council had approved over time towards paid parking and franchise fees. The reserves policy does outline for us criteria on how reserves can be used and for what, and in some cases outlines minimum contribution requirements as well. Then the last is the long-term financial strategy. That's on page 32, and as we just heard in the strat plan update, the update to this policy is planned for 2025. We had hoped to get that work done this year. As you know, our consultant who was going to do that work for us has moved on to another role. Thankfully got us through the bulk of our livability tax program work, but we're working on securing someone else to do this work for us.
I might know somebody else who might have some time on their hands to do that job in the future here too.
I'll just move on. The long-term financial strategy is a critical tool to help you appropriately plan future long-term infrastructure needs around repair, rehab, maintenance. And so we need to update it to the current times, what we know now, how our infrastructure has changed. And then an additional layer that we're looking at updating in that plan is also the operating impact, the impact on the operating budget of capital assets and how we need to plan for them. Happy to answer questions.
Something I wonder if we could just double check. The property tax policy, FIN 005, I don't know if it captures the amendment that I brought to have residential vacant service land taxed at the same rate as primary.
Okay, thank you for catching that. I'll have to look at that with clerk's team. Yes.
It was an alternative that was moved.
Yes, you did
Because we
move,
wanted
yeah.
it taxed as
That's
the
right.
primary rate and not the livability rate.
Yeah,
And sorry, that might have been I'm wondering if I just printed an old version and not the final one.
Yeah,
So
we'll
let us
double
look into that. I manually pulled it together for the attachment. So if you're just looking at the paper version, it's very likely I just pulled an outdated
It
one.
is the signed one.
Oh, okay.
So
Okay, we
it's-
can look into that.
Yeah.
thank you for catching that.
Yeah,
Sorry
thank
about
you.
that. Okay, over to Ms. Gibbons for an economic update.
So to round out the rest of the content we'll be covering today, highlighting one last external piece that does have a significant impact on our budget is a very brief economic update. I do want to thank our portfolio managers at CIBC Wood Gundy for providing this content. I am by no means an economist, so please bear with me as I do my best to speak to this. Our province is forecasted to lead the provinces in growth for 25 and 26. Indications are that the province will continue to do well, and from my perspective, when Dr. Cottle spoke earlier to us being the backyard for our regional visitors, I'm anticipating this will only continue, if not increase, in the coming years. Inflation has now come back below the 2% target. That could start to alleviate some of the pressure we've seen on our budget in recent years from those high inflationary pressure years that we saw across many of our expense line items, and how we've really needed to increase our cost of living adjustment to our own staff to keep pace with those inflationary pressures. Dr. Cottle did just reference our COLA numbers in her presentation. So we do typically have a lag in that our calculation is always catching up on the recent months of CPI data. And because we start planning for all this budget back in the summer, at this point, in some cases, we were looking at data that's almost 18 months old. So that's where we really see that 2% target captured for the future years, and the COLA and inflationary expectations we've built in for future years really aligning with that 2% target. Interest rates are forecasted to continue to decline. So on the one hand, future interest rates on our capital projects where we take debt could come down, especially with the announcement as we've spoken to, I think, a couple times today with regards to the reinstatement of the preferential interest rates through the provincial program. So we should benefit from the movement in interest rates generally and the reinstatement of the former policy on the province's side. On the other hand, and this is what we have represented on the slide here, we will likely also see the interest we make on our bank and investment accounts come down, where we won't see the same interest on things like our reserve funds when they're invested. And so I did want to flag, this is one way we have been able to grow our reserves where we've had really challenging years and it's been hard to increase our contributions. We have benefited from higher interest rates and growing our investments that way. So, you know, we do definitely invest our funds prudently and in alignment with all the rules under the MGA, but we've always really looked at it with a view to growth and making sure those tax dollars are earning as much for us while they sit in our reserves as they possibly can to help us address the significant needs that we have. Now, if you're a numbers person like me, these are some charts with that information. So this shows real GDP, the unemployment rates, and CPI for the last kind of 2 years, the current year, and then the next 2 years we're looking at for our 2-year budget approval. So Alberta is the second line here at the top. Really the most pertinent for our discussion, I would say, is the CPI and how we're kind of, well, you can't see my cursor on the screen, but coming out of those higher inflationary years at 6.5 and 3.3, this year at 2.9, and then moving to 1.9 and 1.9 for the future years, again, kind of aligning with our future CPI and COLA expectations at 2%, and where our 3.9 is still kind of catching up from some of those higher inflationary years we've experienced. And finally, with regards to the interest rates, this shows that basically from now, November 2024, to the end of December 2026, the 2 years we're looking to approve, we're looking at that overnight target rate from 3.75 down to 2.25. So again, kind of helps where we're taking debt for our own projects, but we do see a corresponding reduction in our interest rate revenue where we do have our funds invested. Happy to answer any questions there may be on this content, again, acknowledging I have not much technical expertise in this particular area. That's it.
I don't see any. All right, so that brings us to the end of the agenda for today. Our next meeting is that next Tuesday? Right. Okay, so I will move that we adjourn for today. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. Thank you very much for all the work that was done to help set the stage for us as we go into